You have a point there, said Mr. Weaver. But what was the reason? If it is something very valuable, Joe remarked. Mr. Moore may have been trying to keep thieves from knowing about the Aztec Warrior object. Then we'd better watch our step, Mr. Hardy commented. The hunt for clues proceeded. The men went on with their search among the letters, and the boys continued to look at slide after slide. They came across a picture of a mysterious man alongside a tremendous tree. Printed on the slide were the words, Tool Tree at Miltla. Wow, I never saw such a big tree trunk, Joe exclaimed. A few minutes later, they came to another picture marked Zacalo at Taxco. Here's our friend again, said Frank, as the familiar figure was shown on the screen. When Mr. Hardy and Mr. Weaver returned to the room, the boys showed them the two slides. The detective rubbed his chin thoughtfully. I feel pretty sure we'll find the man in those pictures in Mexico. Frank and Joe watched their father's face as he gazed off into space. What was going through his mind? Suddenly, he turned to his sons. Boys, I believe that you and I had better divide up work on this case. I can't get away from here right now because of other commitments. How about you fellows going to Mexico and seeing if you can locate Roberto Hermosa? Joe grinned. I could be ready to leave in an hour, he said. And boy, what a trip. You just buy my plane ticket, Dad, said Frank, and I'll be on my way. Mr. Hardy smiled. It won't be that easy. There's a ruling against teenagers going around Mexico without an adult. I'll have to arrange for special passes for two young detectives on a worthwhile mission. As Mr. Hardy stopped speaking, Mr. Weaver clapped him on the shoulder. Fenton, that's a brilliant idea. You and I will keep on hunting around here for the Aztec Warrior property. It will be a kind of a race to see which half of this team comes out ahead. Mr. Hardy laughed, then said to Frank and Joe, How would you like to take Chet Morton along? You mean it? The boys exclaimed together. Their father nodded. I'll hold you down if you get too foolhardy. The brothers grinned. Then Frank asked Mr. Weaver if he might take the slides showing the mysterious man and make prints of them. The lawyer consented. The boys hurried home. After lunch, Joe went to the workshop to make the prints, while Frank telephoned Chet. There was a war whoop from the other end of the line. Hot tamales, Chet exclaimed. I can have all of them I want. How about coming over so we can talk about our trip? Frank asked. Be right there, Chet promised. Meet you out in our workshop, said Frank. 15 minutes later, the boys heard the sound of a familiar horn. Instead of a few blasts, the raucous noise continued. Chet sure is happy, said Joe with a grin. Well, we may as well go out and welcome him. Standing at the curb was Chet's jalopy, its horn still blowing continuously. The stout boy was not inside the car. He was standing on the sidewalk, his face red with embarrassment. Aunt Gertrude was there, wagging a finger at him and saying, The idea! If you don't know how to take care of a car, you have no business running one. By the time several neighbors had come rushing toward the jalopy, one woman called out, Is something the matter at your house, Miss Hardy? Frank and Joe howled with laughter as they hurried toward the scene. Chapter 4, The Hijacked Plane. Frank waved at the crowd gathered near Chet's jalopy. Nothing's wrong here except a little short in the horn button wiring, he said. Joe quickly released the car hood and disconnected a wire. The horn stopped blowing. What'll I do now if I want to use it? Chet asked, dismayed as the onlookers dispersed. Just get the wire replaced, said Joe. Chet scratched his head. I haven't many spare parts, but I do have some extra wire. Go to get it, boy, said Joe, unless you want us to send for a mechanic. Okay, Chet agreed. He found a pair of pliers in the dashboard compartment and went to work. With Frank and Joe's help, he soon had the old wire replaced and the horn in proper working order. "Thanks, fellows," he said. "I didn't mean to hold up your plans. Tell me about this Mexican trip. I can't wait to go." First, they gave Chet some kidding advice about eating in Mexico. "You'll have to be careful," Frank told him, "or you'll burn up your insides." "Oh, all their food isn't hot," Chet retorted. "Tortillas and enchiladas are mighty good eating, but no red pepper chocolate sauce for me," Joe chanted in a sing-song, off-key voice. "For making tortillas, use you'll use a mediate, and for bed, we'll use a pediate." Chet scowled. "You won't catch me sleeping on any straw mat. I'm not an Aztec." Frank and Joe laughed, then led the way into the house to brief Chet on the trip and show him the prints. We're going to the various places where Mr. Moore took pictures," Frank told him. "That means we'll see some Indian ruins." "We sure will, probably several of them." Chet looked dubious. "I hope you won't ask me to climb to the top and look for clues. I hear those steps are so narrow you have to walk sideways to keep from falling off." "Right," said Frank. "That's the best way to go, either up or down, according to the Indians. You zigzag from left to right so you never get tired or out of breath." Shortly afterward, Mr. Hardy came to announce that all the arrangements for the trip had been made. "I have the special passes for you three teenagers and some reserved hotel accommodations in Mexico City. If there are any other places you want to investigate, you'll have to make your own plans." "How are we going to travel?" Chet asked. "In my plane," the detective answered. "Jack Wayne will take you and then return immediately. He'll fly down for you when you're ready to come back." Mr. Hardy had found it necessary to purchase a plane for use in emergencies connected with his work. Both Frank and Joe had piloted the craft, but Jack Wayne was always in command on long trips. "When do we start?" Joe asked. "How about tomorrow morning?" The three boys said they would be ready, and Chet left to go home and pack. Frank busied himself working out an itinerary of the places shown in Mr. Moore's pictures. Joe went to the workshop to print extra copies of the deceased man's mysterious companion. When this was done, the brothers drove to the airfield to check out the Hardy plane. Jack Wayne was not there, so the boys hopped into the blue and white single-engine craft, and Frank took the controls. Soon they were soaring above Bayport, then out over Barnett Bay. "Seems to be in ship shape," Frank observed, circling back. As they prepared to land, Joe suddenly gasped in horror. "Look out!" Zooming directly toward them, was another plane. There was not a second to lose. Frank pulled back on the stick and sent his craft sharply upwards. A collision was avoided by mere yards as the other plane sped on below them. The Hardys shuddered at the close call. "That pilot must be nuts," Joe said hoarsely. Frank landed without further incident. From the tower, they learned that a novice had been flying the other plane and had temporarily frozen in panic. "Too bad," said Joe. "He'd better stay grounded for a while." Still shaken, the boys went home. As they entered the hall, their father was answering the phone. "Mr. Weaver is calling to say that Mr. Brower had regained consciousness." Could the three detectives come to the Bayport Hospital? "Right away," Mr. Hardy promised. The three went to the hospital. After inquiring at the information desk where Mr. Brower's room was, they took the elevator to the second floor. Mr. Weaver greeted them at the door at the patient's room. Although somewhat pale, Mr. Brower managed an apologetic smile. "I am sorry I put you boys in so much trouble. I was very foolish and regret having entered the house. Jonathan gave me a key years ago, and I never returned." Mr. Brower added that he was badly in need of the inheritance willed to him. "I was merely doing what you people are, looking for a clue to the Aztec Warrior object. By finding it, you could receive your inheritance sooner," Mr. Hardy remarked. "That's right. Well, I didn't have any luck, and I did have a bad accident for my trouble. Mr. Hardy and Mr. Brower asked Mr. Brower if he had any idea what the Aztec Warrior object was. The sick man shook his head. Jonathan told me a long time ago that he had received a very unusual and valuable piece of a descendant of the Aztecs, but he never told me what it was. My cousin was pretty secretive. And you have no idea what this thing was? Not the slightest. Mr. Brower said that his cousin had told him the precious piece had been lent to him on condition that he returned it at the end of 5 years. He may have meant the Aztec warrior object mentioned in the will. Then it's possible this mysterious piece may have been sent back already, and Mr. Moore forgot to take the notation out of the will, Mr. Weaver suggested. Mr. Brower said he doubted this. Only 3 years had gone by since Jonathan received it. My cousin said he had the object safely hidden. I have assumed it is in his house. Since nothing more could be learned from Mr. Brower, his visitors left. When they reached the street, Frank suggested that they all return to the Moore home and make a still more intensive search. The others agreed, and soon the lawyer was unlocking the front door of the mansion. Mr. Hardy, who always carried several detective devices in the trunk of his car, went to get them. The boys helped to carry in a portable fluoroscope and a metal detector. Every wall, floor, and ceiling was gone over. Several times Frank and Joe became excited as the fluoroscope lighted up objects or the detector began to click, but nothing of importance was located. The Hardys had no better luck with a systematic examination for hollow walls and trapdoors. Nothing was found. Mr. Weaver, who had followed the Hardys around in amazement, sighed. The answer to this whole mystery must lie with Roberto Hermosa. Mr. Hardy agreed that they seemed to have come to a dead end in every other direction. He asked if there had been any late word on the man who had tried to get into the house. No, Mr. Weaver replied. Just to be sure, the fellow wasn't one of the beneficiaries. I checked each one. Every man has an alibi. The lawyer smiled. I tried hard to be a detective, but haven't come up with a single clue. I think you have done very well for an amateur, said Mr. Hardy with a smile. Here we are, trained in this kind of work, and we haven't done any better than you. When he reached Mr. Weaver's office, the lawyer got out of the car and wished the boys the best of luck in Mexico. It is just about everything one could wish in the way of scenery, the mystery of ancient civilizations, and the fascinating Spanish influence. Joe grinned. We'll try to take it all in all of them and solve your mystery besides. When the Hardys reached home, the boys' mother greeted them in Spanish, adding, I thought I might as well give you a little practice. Joe and Frank were amazed at their mother's command of language, which they and Chet already spoke. I thought I'd surprise you, she said. I'd tell you a little secret. I studied Spanish in school, but forgot most of what I had learned. So I have been taking lessons for the past 2 months. Mother, why don't you come along with us? Frank asked suddenly. Mrs. Hardy smiled. I don't think I'd be equal to meeting an Aztec warrior. The Hardys spent a pleasant evening together. The following morning, Chet's father dropped his son off at the Hardy home. With warm embraces from Mrs. Hardy for Frank and Joe, and words of advice from Aunt Gertrude to watch out for jaguars, the 3 boys set off for the airport with Mrs. Hardy.